I actually have a real pleasure of introducing Elisa. Elisa has quite an amazing background and even runs an even cooler company, probably one of the coolest companies I've ever had the pleasure of reading about and learning about. Elisa's got herself as a member of YPO, how long now? 4 years. She's in the Barbary Coast chapter. She has an amazing background from Princeton, Stanford, and Wharton, all three. So I guess Harvard missed out. So great. It's good for those three. She was the managing director of Laurel Capital for quite some time, and ran three of their portfolio companies for a little while. And now she's running what I think is a very, very cool company, and that is a company called FutureBrand Speck. And they are a leader in bringing brand innovation to the market. And this is, I think you're going to really enjoy the next 15 to 20 minutes on what Elisa has to say about how brands and how businesses can innovate continually and from a marketing perspective and technology perspective. So with that, Elisa, welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here. Thank you so much. I think that was possibly a perfect segue, because what we're working on is actually going to lead to a little bit of the underpinnings of the algorithm that could be under that sentiment, emotion-centric piece that will anticipate what everybody's going to do with their minds and hearts. So what I want to talk to you about today is this idea of dependable innovation. Does it exist? Lots of folks are working on it. Lots of folks are looking at this sort of innovation industry, and I'm going to argue that the innovation industry is essentially in its infancy, maybe its early adolescence, as evidenced by the fact that there's no sausage maker, there's no engine. If we sort of put the inputs into the factory system, what comes out the other side, none of us are willing to look at and say, I'll put my money there. Until that happens, we're not quite ready. We're still innovating with a little bit of Legos, a little bit of finger puppets, a little bit of sticky notes, and it's a somewhat, yet it's on every single firm's number. It's in their top. 70% of firms are naming it as one of their big initiatives for the year, for the last 5 years. Most firms name it as one of their core values. It's just, and yet we don't quite have it right. So what I'm committed to, and sort of my life's mission, is to increase the efficacy of the innovation engine. And I'll call it it could be a process, but I'll go ahead and call it an engine. So, my notes are very small. So this is about what it looks like right now. This is what it feels like for folks. And essentially, at FutureBrand Speck, we've done years of research on what worked and what didn't. We've gotten the privilege of partnering with lots of leading thinkers on this. We've had the privilege of deploying our own very, very smart teams and trying to figure out exactly what drives the efficacy of innovation. If I do my job today, I'm hoping to literally give you guys a tool you can use on the back of an envelope that you could use any time you're trying to innovate something. I'll define innovation. I hate the word. I can't think of a better one. But fundamentally as change that creates value. If it doesn't create value, it's just change. So again, we've Speck, just by quick context, just so that you have a sense of it, we've had the privilege of deploying this tool. We didn't just make it up. We've gotten to deploy it with some of the world's most innovative companies. We are mostly behind the scenes, so we don't get to talk much about what we've innovated, but I can tell you that we've generated billions in revenue for our clients, and we're in your pocket, we're in your body, we're in your hospital, we're in your power grid, we're in your automobile. So we've innovated in all sorts of disparate markets using this tool, and we've used all sorts of clever folks to do that, including strategists, ethnographers, deep engineers, the whole works. My goal today is have you walk out of here not feeling this. This is about where the state of the industry is. So quickly to catch us up on the innovation industry to present, as we look at the innovation process, we've come a long way. Everybody kind of gets that it's customer-centric. The gap between a business objective and a customer need is closing. The gap, call it an experience gap as you wish, but it's fundamentally, people are sort of getting now, all right, fundamentally my business objective needs to overlap with a customer need. That's progress. It's not happened everywhere. There's a divide between the thinkers and the makers, and that's getting increasingly bridged. Large corporations who have lots of silos, and the brand department deeply understands users, and that doesn't manifest all the way through the engineering execution team. That's getting increasingly bridged. The massive sparkling Legos and finger puppets is increasingly getting dismissed. And those who are sort of operating on extra credit are at a point where they're starting to get, it's not just the product. There are infinitely interwoven, a myriad of interwoven touch points that need to speak to each other, sort of using the classic example of Apple. People get it now. The retail environment speaks to the packaging, speaks to the product, speaks to the scripting of the guy behind the Genius Bar. All of that has to come together in a cohesive way to move emotion. And I would say that most folks are sort of on the page of emotion drives decisions. So with this idea of inside that, the gap increasingly closes, what you've got in the middle is this sort of a deep understanding of a connected product experience. I don't mean IoT by that, though that's certainly included. It's a truly interwoven brand, and I'll / brand with emotion. In my mind, brand is just the platform for all things emotional that holds all of that together. When you get that right, you can increasingly close the gap. So step one, and this isn't the primary focus, but there's two things I want to talk about today. There's two places where innovation goes wrong. One is this issue of, are all of the aspects of the ecosystem being thought about? So this is the classic, you have to think about the supply chain while you think about the product, while you think about the shippability and the serviceability and the manufacturability, while you're making sure it's beautiful. All of that, where a lot of innovations have ended up on the cutting room floor is just because folks, that takes a lot of thinking and a lot of coordinating. It doesn't mean you have a thermal engineer in every single meeting with a logo designer, but that there is a cohesive epicenter that, of course, is the human need, the emotion. So what I want to talk about as sort of part two is, what I just spoke to is this idea of the execution, the solution creation. So when you're creating a solution, make sure you think about everything at once is kind of the basic idea of that. But if you get the problem wrong, it doesn't matter it doesn't matter how good the solution is. You got to get the problem right. So right problem, right solution is the ultimate combination. What I'm very passionate about and getting a lot of insight around increasingly is the science of the human emotion and what really drives human behavior. An example of this, of course, is we got asked recently on a culture design project, I want my people to be more innovative. And we all kind of get the idea of, I need my people to be more innovative. Well, what makes an engineer in Stuttgart feel more innovative or behave in a more innovative way? Might be a deep sense of feeling safe. What makes a marketing manager in Silicon Valley behave in a more innovative way, if I'm starting to speak to emotion, might be feeling inspired. So we're starting to get the sophistication of and the nuance around emotion. But the easiest way to convey the this one goes to 11 feature of what I think helps us get most accurate around emotion identification is through a story. So Starbucks is looking at, I want to raise the price of my cup of coffee by 25 cents. God forbid. I paid $6 this morning. But you want to raise your cup of coffee price by 25 cents, and the assumption base is that in order to do that, and this is sort of where the story starts, is I've increased the sort of perceived value of the coffee cup. That seems to be where a gap is. So I sort of did my classic, how many of you are familiar with journey maps and sort of think in terms of journeys? So you do the classic journey map, you sort of map it along, and you say, you know what, it looks like this moment of the coffee cup exchange is somewhat underperforming, and I'm going to redesign that touch point and make it consistent with my brand. This depends on the y-axis being something as simple as how happy is my user? Great, good, average, bad, etc. The big idea, and I wish it were more complicated and more sophisticated, but it's actually as simple as can be and incredibly intuitive. The thing that seems to wildly increase the efficacy of an innovation is basically when you get the y-axis right. So when you think about not just how does it make the user feel, but how does it make the user feel about themselves, you have a dramatically increased likelihood of getting that y-axis right. So when you really think, what does a user need to feel in order to pay 25 cents more per cup of coffee? The answer, it turns out, is worthy. They don't need to feel happy about the cup of coffee. They need to feel worthy. In order to optimize for worthiness, as soon as you stick that on the y-axis, you're going to see a very different shape. You might, different below the line moments, different above the line moments. It turns out that the thing that most undermines worthiness in the retail environment, getting a cup of coffee, is the moment of going to the loo. You have an 18% chance of doing it. It's a coffee shop after all. And where do you put your coffee cup? On the back of the toilet, on the sink. It's a moment where you just feel a little bit less worthy. Depending on where you are from a coastal region perspective, the moment of disposal is also a big dip in terms of self-worth. Once you get that right, then the redesign, and of course the classic design engine is go find the moments below the line. We all know that consistency above the line is essential, right? If I go below the line in terms of undermining the consistency of my message, I have to reinforce it 10 times before you believe me again. So I've got to keep all my dots above the line, the big ones, the little ones, et cetera. Big ones are more important. But it changes what it is where it is I'm going to spend my focus. Once I've got my problem statement right, now I go redesign that moment in the bathroom and I put a little cool, little clever, place to put my coffee cup, et cetera. So the key is is the step 3, essentially. Of course, ask the right questions, identify the meta and micro maps, identify and weigh the influencing moments, but the real key is that y-axis. It's getting a deep understanding of the essential need driver and fundamentally how a touch point inside an experience, and then that touch points inside of that experience, ultimately leading up to the brand, how does that make a user feel about him or herself? I'll tell one other example, which is we spent with a Fortune 500 healthcare company and Google working on a pretty aggressive innovation. They were the challenger brand in diabetes, type 2 diabetes. Big behavior design problem, as many of you are probably familiar. So getting people to behave the way that will save their own lives is a very, very complicated business, it turns out. And we had the privilege of working on all sorts of aspects of the solution, including the app, the device development, the color schemes, the website, the language design, the visual design. So we had a bunch of different teams working on different aspects. Sort of recipe for disaster generally. And what they came to us with initially was what it is we want everybody to experience is a deep sense of being informed. We want all of this information accessible in all of these different places. And if we had gone forward and designed all of those touch points around that driving emotion, and again, it's pretty sophisticated that they had a driving emotion identified, it would have, I think at this point we all agree, it would have flopped. It's ended up being a massive success, but only because it turned out that the big driving emotion was not, in fact, I feel informed, but a deep sense of freedom. People living with type 2 diabetes feel very, very trapped, and they have a sense of feeling that they have no control over their quality of life. So this manifests in 1,000 little seemingly irrelevant decisions. The color of buttons, happy colors, simple words, layman's terms, big buttons, thousands and thousands of micro decisions across a suite of touch points that you can argue that there's certainly some big technology innovations and whatnot, but at the end of the day, if all of those didn't sit inside of those thousands of micro decisions that all level up to the right innovation, to the right essential need driving emotion, the efficacy would have been reduced. So that's the big idea. We have used it over and over again. It's wildly working. I kind of can't believe it because I have a private goal of getting this formula right enough that I can sort of go off and save the world. If you get it right, you could go, who knows where you could go? You could go to Africa and solve the water problem. You could go, if you get it right, you could reliably increase value wherever you go. So I'm really, there's no code cracking available, but there's advancing the efficacy. So it's a process. We're not done. I use it everywhere. I use it with my kids. My kids will look at me and say, "Are you experience engineering me right now?" That's the name of the process. And I am. I use it with my husband. I use it with everybody. I'll sit there and I'll think, what is the emotion I need them to feel about themselves right now? If you do that, I guarantee if you walk out of this door and every single moment you're trying to just make better, if you run it through the filter of what is the emotion I need them to feel about themselves, you will end up optimizing the value for all stakeholders to the better. So there you have it. That's my theory. Happy to take any questions. Yes?
Okay, so picking up on what you just said about how person X in that decision chain feels, taking it specifically to a B2B context where the mechanic at the airline working on the airplane is the user, but the person who designed the part into it back at Boeing, someone different, or there's someone purchasing. When you really get to those diffuse decisions in your customer, how might you add an extra layer and kind of look at bring all that together?
The classic multifactorial, there's lots of decision makers and then there's lots of users. It's as simple as it sounds, that Christmas tree, that taxonomy of user maps. There's this decision that's being made around this emotion by this user. And it feels slightly infinite, but it's really not. You end up with a little bit of a tree, and you're sort of, and sometimes it's you're using common sense. You're just doing a quick baseline. What is it I need them to feel? I'll give you an example. In a data center we were working on, nobody could figure out who the user was. Sort of common sense application. There's no user. There's one data center manager. So there's thousands of these around, but they're massive, and you've got one guy you're managing for his emotion. Shouldn't we just get to know him? And what we were trying to figure out was, it ended up being an incredibly emotional moment of, if I'm walking down the aisle, there's a little bit of an innovation of, I'm going to start shining some lights. There's going to be blue lights that I can tell if something's down. And then I go up, and what we found there where the real gap was, is the likelihood of that data center manager to actually shut down the server and feel confident that I'm going to shut down the Eastern Seaboard for a bit because of this message. What do I have to believe? What do I have to feel in order to be willing to make the right choice? The right time, is it the blue light? So at every single moment, there is emotion in play. I don't know if that example sort of addresses the issue, and you just do that over and over and over again, all the way down to, and many times it doesn't manifest in a consumer product example. It's decision makers all throughout. Culture design's the ultimate example of that. How are you measuring sentiment? So we don't do a lot of macro measuring. We do macro measuring as a quality assurance test on what we assessed at a sort of ethnographic level. We are mostly determining these essential need drivers. If you're looking for a quick rule of thumb, you can basically still work with 1968 Maslow's hierarchy, but generally you're doing classic ethnography and applying this additional filter. And of course, in the innovation world, we all know that you can never ask direct questions. How do you feel? How does this make you feel? You're observing and sequencing together the conclusions, and then you use quant analysis to cross-check.
One last question. Any other questions?
Thank you very much, everybody.